we have to wait for the ranking member. As soon as she gets here, we'll get started. Ready? You all set? Okay. Committee will come to order. I want to wish everybody a good morning. We thank you all for being here. We have a special thanks for our witness here who's taken time away from her very busy schedule to be with us today. I would note that we may very well, in fact we will, be interrupted by votes here shortly. When that occurs, we'll wrap up, not immediately, but we have 15 minutes to get over there and vote. So we'll, at some point between the bells going off and us having to be there, we'll wrap up and come back after to continue the hearing, but depending on how many votes we have, we could be gone anywhere from a half hour to an hour or so. We are here today to follow up on a hearing we held earlier this week where we heard from a distinguished panel of experts about the challenges faced by small businesses and entrepreneurs in the new sharing economy. We heard firsthand about the challenges they're facing in dealing with a broken tax code and outmoded IRS policies that are not really designed to accommodate them. As I said in Tuesday's hearing, the IRS has not been a part of the solution as taxpayers struggle to navigate the new sharing economy. Too often, it seems to have been part of the problem itself. This failure has left on-demand platform companies and their workers confused and frustrated as they try to do the right thing and pay the taxes that they owe. Congressional committees like ours have a duty to provide robust oversight of the IRS and ensure they are providing small businesses with clarity and treating them fairly. When the IRS is behind the times, it puts small businesses behind the 8 ball. This must change. We are hearing from entrepreneurs across the country that they do not fully understand their tax obligations for sharing economy income. In many cases, they don't even receive an end-of-the-year statement documenting that income. As if that wasn't bad enough, here's the real kicker. Many on-demand companies say they would gladly provide tax compliance training, but they don't because they're afraid the IRS will reclassify their relationship and subject them to a whole new host of regulations and obligations. The current tax and regulatory climate clearly is not working for entrepreneurs in the sharing economy. We must do better, and the IRS has a key responsibility here. I recently noticed that the IRS own mission statement on its own website says the agency will, quote, provide America's taxpayers top quality service by helping them understand and meet their tax responsibilities and enforce the law with integrity and fairness to all, unquote. The time has come for the IRS to live up to this standard and help our entrepreneurs in the new sharing economy. Today, we're pleased to have with us a true expert on these issues, the National Taxpayer Advocate, Nina Olson. She has examined these issues in depth and will share some proposals to address these changes. We're very much looking forward to your testimony here today, and I'd now like to yield to the ranking member, Ms. Velasquez from New York, for her opening statement.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this meeting. Welcome, Ms. Olson. The sharing economy is based on a model in which individuals are able to borrow or rent assets owned by someone else. The number of companies employing the sharing economy platform has grown significantly over the past decade. Yet, despite the popularity and success of these companies, the sharing economy presents unique legal challenges. As we learned on Tuesday, the most hotly contested challenge posed by the sharing economy is the issue of worker misclassification. This issue arises when companies incorrectly classify their workers as independent contractors instead of employees. By classifying workers as independent contractors, companies do not have to provide the benefits that are legally required with employee status, which can greatly reduce their costs. As such, the legal classification of workers in the sharing economy has significant implications for workers, companies, and their consumers. While no one can agree on the proper label for these workers, a fact of the matter is that these businesses rely on these workers, no matter how they are classified. And without workers, there's no business. We heard from private sector witnesses during our previous hearing about the benefits and challenges of the sharing economy business model. We even learned how the law is unclear, making it more difficult for small businesses to comply and harder for workers to understand their rights. Furthermore, this issue harms the nation's budget in lost tax revenue. We have already had a crackdown on worker misclassification by both Treasury and the Department of Labor. However, the sharing economy remains an aberration in this concern because no one is quite sure how to apply the law. This committee is tasked with assisting small businesses, especially when there is no bright line test for compliance. However, we must also ensure workers are being treated fairly. Today, we are privileged to have the National Taxpayers Advocate here to help us better understand the complexity surrounding this area of the law. It is important for this committee to fully comprehend what is happening in the sharing economy so that we can work towards implementing clear change that is easy to understand for those small businesses that are operating in the sharing economy. And I just would like to also add, Ms. Olson, that maybe on your either testimony or later on, tell us, how do you see the IRS to be more effective in order to do their job? Because here in Congress, we love to vilify institutions and government. And if we cannot dismantle the agency, then we cut their budget. And when you cut their budget, there are real consequences. And as people in Chicago try to take a flight and miss the flight because of the long lines, we know that budget and budgetary constraints have consequences. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. And if committee members have opening statements prepared, we'd ask that they be submitted for the record. And I'll take just a moment to explain our rules here as far as timing goes, which are pretty simple. You get 5 minutes and we get 5 minutes, and there's a lighting system to help you out. The green light will be on for 4 minutes. Red light comes on to let you know you got about a yellow light for about a minute, and then the red light, if you wouldn't mind. Kind of keeping within that, we'll give you a little flexibility if you need it, since we only have one witness here this morning. And we are especially happy to have this witness because it's Ms. Nina Olson, who is the National Taxpayer Advocate, NTA, who is the voice of the taxpayer within the IRS and before Congress. She leads the Taxpayer Advocate Service, the TAS, an independent organization within the IRS that helps taxpayers resolve problems and works for systematic change to mitigate problems experienced by groups of taxpayers. Throughout her career, Ms. Olson has advocated for the rights of taxpayers and for greater fairness and less complexity in the tax system. Ms. Olson was appointed to the position of National Taxpayer Advocate in January 2001. Among her many accomplishments, the IRS adopted the Taxpayer Bill of Rights in June 2014, for which Ms. Olson had long advocated, so congratulations on that. Prior to her appointment as the NTA, Ms. Olson founded and served as Executive Director of the Community Tax Law Project, the first independent Section 501c3 low-income taxpayer clinic in the United States, and we thank you for that also. She is an attorney licensed in Virginia and North Carolina. We won't hold that against you. Being a recovering attorney myself. Ms. Olson, you are recognized for 5 minutes. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Chairman Chabot and Ranking Member Velasquez. And thank you for inviting me to speak on the important and emerging topic of the sharing economy. In my written testimony, I focus mainly on two aspects of tax administration: the IRS presence in the sharing economy and ways to increase tax compliance among participants in that economy. Estimates show that over 2.5 million Americans are earning income through the sharing economy, and that number is expected to continue its upward trajectory. Establishing the tax compliance norms in this emerging industry in its infancy will benefit participants in the tax the tax system as this segment grows. Understandably, many of these new service providers may not fully comprehend their tax filing obligations or have experience with the requisite tax record keeping. According to a recent survey conducted by NASE, 69% of entrepreneurs who participate in the sharing economy received absolutely no tax guidance from the companies with which they work. It bears saying that if a person working in the sharing economy called the IRS toll-free line today, he or she would hear a recording saying the IRS is not answering any tax law questions after April 15th, so please check irs.gov. The same message is given to people asking tax law questions at the IRS walk-in sites. For a tax agency to not answer questions from taxpayers trying to learn what they need to do to comply, well, it is beyond unacceptable. It is absurd. There are many ways in which the IRS can provide improved taxpayer service and assistance to this growing sector. For example, many Uber drivers engage in an online forum where they can share information about or solicit advice on a wide range of topics. There is even a sub-forum dedicated to tax compliance, focused on 1099 income deductions and the IRS. Similarly, Airbnb hosts have created an online forum where hosts can share advice with other hosts, and there is a sub-forum dedicated to regulations, tax issues. The IRS could convey helpful information through such online forums. It could even designate a representative to respond to questions in Ask Me Anything style on a Reddit forum for Airbnb or Uber users. Another benefit of these exchanges is that the IRS will learn about specific challenges and issues facing the segment of the economy and do a better job of tailoring its guidance for both taxpayers and IRS employees. While IRS publications contain helpful information, an Airbnb host would have to sift through a 24-page Publication 527 residential rental property, and an Uber driver would have to navigate through the 50-page Publication 463 travel, entertainment, gift, and car expenses, and they still might not understand how these rules apply to themselves as service providers in a sharing economy. Thus, the IRS should develop and publicize a new publication for sharing economy participants that at a minimum provides a checklist of issues that first-time self-employed persons participating in that economy should be aware of. It could also create a dedicated web page containing tax tips for freelancers engaging in a sharing economy. Even better, the IRS could create an online wizard to walk taxpayers who are newly self-employed through the various steps one needs to take. For example, getting an employer identification number, making estimated tax payments, keeping books and records. Why not create a downloadable mileage log for taxpayers to use with pre-populated mileage rates for a given year that we set? Why not develop a calendar function that permits taxpayers to add the estimated tax payment due dates to their smartphone calendars? These steps would benefit all self-employed persons. In my reports to Congress and in my written testimony, I have made numerous proposals over the years designed to increase compliance among small businesses. Among other things, I recommend that Congress align the estimated tax payment deadlines with calendar year quarters that are easier to remember and to calculate net income, such as the last day of the month following the end of the calendar quarter, rather than on April 15th, June 15th, September 15th, and January 31st, which aligns to nothing whatsoever. Because research shows taxpayers are more compliant in paying taxes on income subject to withholding, independent contractors should have the option to enter into voluntary withholding agreements with the entities to which they provide services. In conclusion, there is lots the IRS can do to establish a presence in the community, provide service to the participants, and provide guidance to shape the compliance norms of these taxpayers. Thank you, and I will be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I'll yield myself 5 minutes. I'll begin. The first question, I think you're correct that the IRS has a great opportunity to be at the forefront of tax compliance for the sharing economy. Yet we've seen, as you indicated, very little action as of yet from the IRS in this area. Does the IRS not yet realize the looming issues that are here, or are there other reasons for its failure to initiate some of the actions that you described as would be helpful?
I think that there's a recognition that this is a growing part of the economy. I think that the IRS moves slowly. and hearings such as this will help move it along. I think my office can play a role in instigating some activity like these publications. I think issues about what can be done online, there's always concerns about whether the private sector will view that as intruding in their bailiwick. And my point there is I don't see that as competition. I see us working together, and we do, after all, own setting the mileage rates and own setting the deadlines and things like that. I think also, if I can just say this, that worker classification is an issue. There is the ban on providing guidance, and so it becomes hard to develop a website if you are banned on providing anything other than just the rote, here are the 20 factors type guidance, which is really not helpful in this environment.
You brought up the current due dates for quarterly estimated payments and how they're so oddly spaced, and I was a sole practitioner attorney for years and filed my own stuff for myself and my employees, and it's hard to figure why is it like that, and why don't they make it, just the quarters or some way that actually makes sense so that people don't have to sit down and remember, oh yeah, the last one's in January, is it the 15th or is it 31st, when is it? So
I don't know the historical reason. We were talking about that the other day. It might go back to some kind of budgeting issue at some point, money coming into the Treasury. We are actually poking around in the archives to find the reason. But we've been advised that it, at this point, would need congressional action. That's what we've been advised. And I really think doing it on a quarterly basis, within 30 days after the quarter ends, makes sense. I mean, trying to calculate net income on June 15th is silly and difficult.
thank you. Maybe this is one that the ranking member, myself, I mean, if it really does take congressional action, maybe we could work together and offer legislation that could be bipartisan and make it happen.
I think the self-employed persons of America would thank you.
Yeah, I think so, and so they could thank us both. Yeah, we'll work on it together. A lot of this is actually a very bipartisan committee. We actually do work on stuff together. The other committees are pretty awful, but this one is good. A lot. Except for the other two committees I'm on, those are good too. A lot of my constituents have been receiving fraudulent calls from people claiming to represent the IRS and demanding money. The ranking member got them, I got them, you got them. The IRS commissioner himself, Mr. Koskinen, he got them, and our tax lawyer here got them as well. I mean, and this is, and we can kind of, I remember we had been literally on vacation, and my wife is going through and listening, and here's the IRS on the phone. She goes, I don't, I won't tell you what she said. But I told her, I can't believe that the IRS, first of all, doesn't call you. But a lot of people don't know that, especially what I'm concerned about is seniors who may be more vulnerable to these kinds of frauds. And I've heard stories, it was I think it was you actually that told me some examples of these things, which are really sad. Maybe tell them an example, if you would, and what are we as the government doing to stop these things, and why is it so difficult to stop?
Well, the example that we had was my office received a number of packages by Federal Express that just contained a deposit slip of between $5,000 and $8,000 in it. And they were addressed to a particular person at the IRS headquarters in Washington, D.C., and it got delivered to us. This person is fictitious. When we were able to, because it was overnight mail, we had a phone number for the taxpayers who sent these deposits, and we called them. And they explained to us that they had been called by someone who appeared to be an IRS employee and told them that we were sending the sheriff out to them if they did not go to a bank and deposit immediately between $5,000 and $8,000, and they were to stay on the phone until they got to the bank and made that deposit. And then, very cleverly, they were to send the deposit slip to the IRS headquarters building. So if you went online, you would see it was a legitimate address. And the person that we talked to said it was the worst day of his life when he realized about 2 hours after he had transferred $8,000 what he had actually done. What the IRS is doing is they have a lot of information on the web about tax scams, and they have done a lot of public service announcements, not public service announcements, but press releases. I think that public service announcements are the way to go, and I think we just in congressional letters and everywhere, we need to get word out to people that if somebody's threatening to send the sheriff to you, the IRS doesn't do that. You know,
And maybe that's something that we ought to do. My time's expired, so I'll end it with this. But maybe on the forms that we get from the IRS as citizens, maybe there ought to be in great big letters on the envelopes that are going out and right at the top saying that the IRS does not call and threaten and that there's a lot of fraud about this, so don't do it. And I'd put it in big red letters or red, white, and blue letters or something and make it, you know, and let people know. So in any event, but it's particularly frustrating and outrageous that people are being preyed upon by other folks. But my time has expired, and I'd now like to the ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Olson, since 2010, the budget of the IRS has been cut by 18%. And as I mentioned before, this has consequences. When you call in and you are a small business person who wants an answer, you want to get the answer right there. But instead, we have automatic system in place. But I don't want to discuss the budget here. What I want to know is if the IRS has performed outreach to small businesses on this complex topic.
not to my knowledge, and I am concerned about the IRS's small business outreach function. Back in 1998, when the IRS was reorganized, it created a unit called Tech that was solely charged with experts on small business issues and small business law and requirements to be in the communities and conduct outreach to the small businesses. And in about 2004, they dissolved that organization and put all those experts back to work auditing or collecting instead of doing outreach and education to small businesses, and they centralized the unit. Today, there are many states that have no person in the IRS dedicated to do outreach and education to the small businesses of that state. And I really think that's just foolish, that we need to do preventive education and outreach. And if you do that, you will really solve problems and also hear the problems of that sector and be able to give better guidance going forward as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, so that was in 2004, right?
Yeah.
And you can imagine now.
Yeah, what it's like.
2010, the budget has been cut by 18%. Ms. Olson, the 20-factor test to determine proper classification is complex, subjective, and does not always produce clear answers. The potential for errors and abuse is high and do not always produce the same results. Does the IRS provide examples to small businesses as an attempt to help employers define workers?
Well, I think that the difficulty is that it's not supposed to give guidance on worker classification, so it's sort of stuck with producing training materials for its own employees that can be made public and people can read them. The average small business isn't going to read that. The average worker isn't going to read that. You can read court cases where it's been litigated and see what the courts look at. I think I was struck by something that HMRC, which is the UK tax agency, did several years ago. They created a web application, and it was based on the 20 factors, but they had questions that the business could go through and answer. And if you answered them in a certain way, you would get an answer back that would say, we think these workers are independent contractors, or we think they are employees. And if you wanted to keep that answer, then that would be binding unless you had lied materially on that thing. If you didn't like the answer, you didn't have to accept it. You could proceed and ask for greater guidance. And I thought that brought some certainty to people without it being definitive. And we have recommended that for several years, and the IRS has never picked it up.
And they could administratively.
I think, well, I don't know whether under the law, the way that Congress has banned them from issuing guidance, would that web thing be interpreted as guidance?
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Many of the new gig economy entrepreneurs have had difficulty operating their businesses in a regulatory scheme that was formed for traditional brick and mortar businesses. So with the changing environment in which companies conduct daily business, how can we adapt existing laws and regulations to make it easier to classify a worker?
You know, I was really struck by some of the testimony earlier this week about a third way, really, that, you know, our common law rules are based in 17th, 18th century law. And so what does that mean? And I think that was very intriguing to me. And the key factors there are withholding, obviously getting the money into the system, working on benefits for these people, particularly retirement savings, because that is what comes with being classified as an employee. And is there some way to do that in this third type of worker that the economy seems to be moving to? We had proposed several years ago, in response to actually the Hair Salon Association coming to us and saying, we have all these people who are renting booths in hair salons. They're clearly independent contractors, but they're getting into trouble by not paying their estimated taxes. So we're willing to withhold from them. We don't want them to be classified as employees, but we have already an employee on our staff who takes appointments and things like that. We'd be willing to do it. It would make more stable workers. We've been advised by chief counsel in the IRS that needs to be a legislative solution, that you give the IRS the authority to allow people to enter into voluntary withholding agreements.
That was my follow-up.
Yeah.
You answered.
It needs legislation is what we've been told.
Thank you.
you.
Gentlelady's time's expired. The gentlelady from New York, Ms. Meng, who's the ranking member of the Agriculture, Energy, and Trade Subcommittee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Olson, for being here today. My question stems from occasional inquiries that we get from some of our constituent small business owners, and who obviously many of them have fewer resources to spend on accountants working on complex tax problems. One of the issues obviously is worker misclassification, but there are different issues that they face. I wanted to ask, what can we do to put small businesses on a more level playing field to help them? And in the interest of time, part two of my question is, what types of compliance or assistance services or are available, or maybe studies that have been done that could help us better assess the problem?
You know, I think I'll give you an example of something that I think really reduced the burden on small businesses. For years, we recommended that the IRS create a small business, a home office deduction EZ form, where you had a standard deduction for home offices that you could do on square footage instead of doing all these calculations and things like that. And it took a while, but they adopted that. And I think there are many opportunities like that in the law, where you have a law and there's a deductible expense, but if you think about small business record keeping, there's a way to do it that could be a safe harbor or a standard deduction or something like that would reduce record keeping and still guard against abuse, you know, in a way. And I think there's a lot of opportunities there. I am struck, I will come back to the fact that there is really not a geographic presence reaching out to small businesses in the IRS. And to me, that is incredibly important, because the small businesses in New York are different from the small businesses in Ohio, from the small businesses in Iowa and Montana. They all have different kind of needs and challenges. And you have to have somebody in the field knowledgeable about their issues that can also raise them to the IRS. And so in terms of service, I really think a geographic footprint of a small business outreach function would allay a lot of concerns and give the IRS a lot of information to do a better job reaching these taxpayers.
And then finally, in terms of businesses and people just being more technologically savvy, are there apps or software available that could, in a quicker way before IRS may develop some sort of policy to geographically help them, to be able to help them either track their workers or help them more fully comply?
You know, there are many excellent products on the market, and they all cost money. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have them. And as a matter of fact, many small businesses really appreciate them. I think what I've been focusing on is what things can the IRS do that could interface with those products that could get the small business off to the right start, because if you can get them right at the beginning, and build trust at the beginning, so if they do have compliance problems, they're willing to come in and get help rather than letting it pyramid and snowball. That's what I think the IRS needs to focus on, and then how it can partner with the private sector on some of the products that they have, feed our information into their products so that taxpayers can use them in that way.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. We'll go in a second round, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes, or perhaps less if the other members would like to jump in. First of all, you specifically mentioned that taxpayers need to be able to speak with someone and be able to reach the IRS year-round, and I think you mentioned that as of April 15th, after that, they're told to go to the website. What type of service is the IRS currently providing that we should know about, and what can we do to make this a much more taxpayer-friendly experience right now? And is it just a budget issue, or are they going to tell us, well, we just need more money and more staff, and then we can do more things?
I think it's two things. The budget is driving so much. You know, that on the taxpayer service side, you just do need more bodies to pick up the phone and talk to taxpayers. And it's not just talking. It's in Australia they say, stay on the phone. Pick up the phone and stay on the phone. Listen to the taxpayer and try to get to the bottom of what really is their concern, because sometimes they don't express it well themselves. And that takes time, and that means you need enough people to be able to spend that time and get to the problem up front. The other thing is that the IRS does want to move as many people as possible to an online presence, because that is less expensive. I challenge some of that, because I think if the taxpayer doesn't understand online, they'll do something wrong and you'll spend more expensive resources downstream, collecting and auditing and things like that. But they are trying to build a strong online presence where people can see what's going on in their account. Maybe have an account where if they're in dog breeding, they'd get guidance about dog breeding issues and things like that. That's several years down the line, and I think that's a good direction to go in. But I just have to say, I've been in tax since 1975, and there is no substitute for talking to taxpayers and understanding what their confusion is, what they need, and learning from them even as we're teaching them. There's just no substitute, and that's human beings.
Thank you. You recommended that the IRS encourage voluntary withholding agreements in exchange for a safe harbor. Would you recommend that such agreements cover employment taxes, income taxes, or both, or what would you suggest?
I think it needs to be both. Our concern was in particular self-employment tax, because sometimes with expenses, these businesses are so marginal that they owe very little, income tax. So we had focused on that self-employment tax, which always shocks the small business person and drives them underground sometimes. And, that's just not the direction we want to go. But we did acknowledge both. And so many businesses that are working in this gig economy, or in the Salon Association or the Travel Agent Association, they are already in the withholding system, because they do have formal employees like a secretary or receptionist already in their system. So it's just adding some more and doing the withholding. And there's a business reason for it, because then they get better stability among their workforce.
Thank you. You had talked about the IRS creating an online wizard to help sharing economy workers. How exactly would you envision that working?
Well, I think if someone was thinking, I'm going into this component of it, I'm selling something on Etsy, or I'm working with some platform, that you could go to this and it would walk you through and say, okay, the first thing you need is an employer identification number. Go here. And we have a device online, but we're directing them. And then when you're done that, the wizard says, okay, here's some information about record keeping. If you're doing driving, you have to have a contemporaneous record of your mileage. And here's what it looks like. And actually, here's an app where you could enter each thing, and we'd multiply it by the mileage rate. And each year that we update the mileage rate, we'll update it, and you can download it to your smartphone. Things like that. Depending on the business, we could craft some one-page guidance to them and direct them to that. There's all sorts of information out there. Finding it and not having to go to 5 different, 7 different, 10 different places to do it is the problem.
Thank you. I've got about 40 seconds left. Let me just get back to the business about the fraudulent calls which are occurring. We talked about an example of what happened and what's happening. Would you let us know, if you can talk to the IRS, what their response is about making this a much higher visibility thing on what they're sending out anyway, so we can inform the public?
Yes, absolutely.
And then secondly, and finally, what do you hear back from the IRS about why they haven't been more successful in stopping this type of behavior, since they know it's going on, and so since it's so widespread?
Well, it's very hard to track down, but I will note that just this week, apparently, they did catch some people that were responsible for one particular scam that basically brought in about $40 million. So they are pursuing these investigations. I have to say, it's very difficult to do that because they're moving, they're in different parts of the country, they're all over the place.
Thank you very much. My time's expired. The rank member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And I can imagine that this issue is more pervasive among immigrants.
Yes.
Maybe that is the reason why I am constantly called, asking for my Social Security or that I owe money here and there. Ms. Olson, we heard on Tuesday about the penalties businesses face for improper classification of workers. In your experience, have you had many complaints about penalties for misclassification?
We get a regular number of cases every year dealing with worker classification, and they're both from the what you would call the employer and the worker. They go in different directions. What I am particularly concerned about is just the lack of clarity in the actual investigations. I think both the employers and the workers are confused about the basis for decisions, and that makes it difficult for either party to appeal, seek appellate rights, and in some instances they're not allowed to have appellate rights. We have written about that in the past. I think there's real opportunities for improving that process. But I do have to come back to that ban on the IRS not being able to do guidance has sort of constricted it and kept it at that 20-factor level, because that's all it can do.
Okay. So, given the fact that this sharing economy is emerging and is growing, have you had any conversations or any interaction with the IRS so that you could have a
I have not
Period.
talked with the IRS division about this. We have talked with taxpayers and representatives of the group, and we are, with this hearing, we've used this hearing to formulate some very specific recommendations. I do think that what we will do is work with the Forms and Pubs section to come up with a document, a mini pub for the sharing economy. And we are working right now on maybe working on a part of our website. We have a toolkit, tax toolkit, that we could have some tips for the sharing economy. And maybe from that get the IRS jump started. Sometimes we're a little more nimble than the rest of the IRS.
Thank you. I yield back. Thank you. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. Does Gentlelady New York have any other questions? Okay. Well, we have done something very unusual here. We're wrapping up early, and we're doing it before the vote. So we greatly appreciate your testimony here today. And in addition to the testimony that we had on Tuesday, I think we learned a lot, really a great deal about the tax challenges faced by participants in the so-called sharing economy. And we got into some of the problems that all taxpayers have, whether they're in the sharing economy or not. I'm particularly pleased that we were able to get somewhat into this, the fraudulent stuff that's going on out there, because there are people being victimized, and to the extent that we can reduce or eliminate that, we certainly ought to be about that. So we look forward to working with you and other stakeholders to rise to the challenge of encouraging the growth and continued success of the so-called sharing economy. It's a rapidly growing example of how the free market, if it's working right, can work, and how we're going to create the jobs of the future. So if there's, I would ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we're adjourned. You can all go home. So thank you.